They say some stories are better left forgotten, but sometimes the past claws its way back. This is one of those nights when an ordinary pizza delivery turned into something much darker. My name's Chris, and what I'm about to tell you is something I buried deep in my memory until it clawed its way back just recently. I was 17 that summer, working late nights at a small pizza shop on the edge of my hometown. It wasn't a dream job, slow shifts, greasy uniforms, and a delivery car so beat up it rattled like bones every time I drove uphill. But with no money and parents who would have lost their minds if I stayed unemployed, I had no choice. It was the kind of job you only take when nothing else will hire you. And to make it worse, the pizza itself was terrible. Not just bad, I mean horrible. Even we couldn't understand why anyone ordered it. I still don't understand why anyone in their right mind would order from that place. If it weren't for the modern gadgets in the shop and the strangely cozy atmosphere, I swear we wouldn't have had a single customer. Out of everything in my childhood hometown, that pizza place is the one thing I missed the least. And that says a lot. The only upside of working there was the silence. Because the food was terrible and the shop sat far from the busy part of town, we rarely got orders. Most nights were completely dead. Too quiet, in fact. I won't bore you with the usual details of how my nights went. It was a pizza place, you can probably imagine the routine. But one night was different. I was restocking the fridge with sodas when the tablet suddenly buzzed with a new online order. A large sausage and olive pizza. I remember it clearly, because we never had olives on the menu. The delivery address caught my eye too. It was out in the middle of nowhere, far beyond our usual delivery zone. Instinctively, I was about to reject it, like I always did with impossible orders. Before I could reject the order, my manager Russell, a guy in his 30s who mostly spent nights glued to Reddit in the back office, looked up and told me to take it. We hadn't had a single delivery in over an hour, and he didn't want to waste the chance. I didn't argue. When the pizza was finally ready, I typed the directions into my phone, grabbed the box, and figured at least it would kill half an hour. But just as I was about to leave, I glanced at the delivery instructions Russell had printed and stapled to the top of the box. I hadn't noticed them before. They read, word for word: park on the street behind the house, walk through the backyard, knock on the back door only. That made me pause. It felt strange. But at 17, I managed to convince myself there were plenty of harmless reasons someone wouldn't want a stranger at their front door. I told myself it wasn't that strange. Maybe they didn't want to wake an elderly person or a baby inside. Maybe their front door was under renovation, or maybe they just wanted to sneak a late-night pizza without a parent or a spouse knowing. It could have been anything. And honestly, all I could think about was how painfully slow the night had been. The idea of folding boxes for another hour sounded worse than a weird delivery request. So I brushed it off and decided to just do my job. But the moment I stepped outside, doubt crept back in. The air hit me like a wall. It was one of those summer nights that felt thick, heavy, like walking through soup. The heat and humidity wrapped around me, unmoving, as if even the air itself was trapped in something invisible. And underneath it all, there was this faint, sour smell, stale and unpleasant, the kind you only notice when the night is far too still. The smell out there clung to everything like old plastic baked in the sun and dirt that had been scorched too many times. I hated it. More than I can explain, but there was no escaping it. I tried driving with the windows down for a couple of minutes, but eventually gave up and blasted the AC just to push it away. The delivery address wasn't anywhere near downtown. In fact, it was in the complete opposite direction, farther away from anything familiar. And considering our shop was already in the middle of nowhere, that didn't exactly comfort me. The GPS said the drive would take a little over 25 minutes, but it felt much longer. The roads were empty. Eerily so. I'm exaggerating a bit, it's not like there weren't any houses at all, but the further I drove, the fewer there were, and the silence in between them stretched longer and longer. When I finally reached the address, I realized the GPS had led me behind the house. It had taken me down a narrow side street that ran along a row of backyards. There were no streetlights, no porch lights, nothing but thick shadows stretching across the fences. I slowed the car and double-checked the number. The place looked abandoned. No lights inside, no cars in the driveway, just an overgrown yard with tall grass and a crooked wooden fence that barely stood upright. But the instructions were clear, so I did as I was told. I parked on the gravel shoulder, grabbed the pizza, and started walking up the incline toward the back door. Pizza in one hand, flashlight in the other. I kept the beam low, making sure I didn't trip on the uneven ground. At the top, I finally saw the door, an old white wooden one, with a tiny glass pane at the top covered by a thin, cheap curtain. I knocked once. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time, already imagining how furious my manager would be if I came back without a delivery. When no one answered, I lifted my hand to knock a third time, but then I froze. The curtain on the door twitched just the slightest movement, like a fingertip brushing against it. It was so quick I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting for whoever was clearly behind the door to open it. But before that could happen, headlights swept across the yard. 2 unmarked cars pulled up behind mine on the narrow street. My first thought was that I was in trouble, maybe trespassing, maybe something worse. One of the car doors opened, and a man stepped out. Even from where I stood, I could see him in the glow of the headlights. He raised a hand, motioning for me to come over. Thinking maybe he was the customer, home late from work, I walked toward him holding the pizza. But as I got closer, I noticed something glint in his hand. It wasn't money, it was a badge. He was an undercover police officer. He wasn't in uniform, just ordinary clothes, but the badge was real. And as soon as I got within earshot, his expression hardened. He told me firmly to go back to my car and wait there. Nothing more. Just that. So I did as he said. I backed away slowly, climbed into the delivery car, and just sat there, watching. That's when it hit me there weren't just 2 officers. There were at least 5, maybe more. They moved like shadows, flashlights cutting across the yard, but none of them spoke a word. They circled the house quietly, deliberately, like they didn't want anyone to know they were there. Not one of them knocked. Not one of them announced themselves. It was strange, unsettling to watch. I remember one officer slowly reaching for the back door handle, the same one I had just been knocking on. He tested it gently, found it locked, then exchanged a look with another officer before backing away. The whole thing felt wrong, like I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to. And I guess I was. After a few tense minutes, the first officer returned. He crouched down beside my car window. I rolled it down, and his eyes flicked to the pizza box on the passenger seat. He let out a short sigh. He didn't give me much detail, kept it vague, careful, like he was holding back, but I could tell he wasn't being a jerk. He just couldn't say too much. The officer finally explained there was an ongoing investigation tied to that property, and he and the others were staking it out. He apologized for not stepping in sooner, saying I had pulled up at the exact moment they were repositioning their vehicles. I offered to show him the delivery order, and he nodded. I pulled it up on the app, but even I could tell it was useless. A phone number, an address, and a first name Jerry. That was it. He copied the number down, then told me flatly to leave. I tried to argue, saying my boss would lose it if I came back with the pizza. He just shrugged, repeated his order for me to leave, and turned away without another word. I was angry, but what could I do? I drove off, the silence of the road pressing down heavier than before. It wasn't until I parked back at the shop that the weight of it hit me. If the police hadn't stepped in when they did, something terrible might have happened. What? Exactly, I don't know. And maybe I don't want to. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The only reason the door never opened was because the police were there. But that raised another question. Why order a pizza at all if you knew you were being watched? Maybe the person inside didn't realize the house was under surveillance. Or maybe they did. Sometimes I wonder if I was just part of some test. A distraction, bait, even to see if the officers were really watching that side of the house. The curtain moving, the silence, the exact timing of everything. It still gnaws at me. I know I'll never get an explanation. And honestly, I probably would have buried the memory for good if one of my old high school friends hadn't brought it up recently. At first, I didn't even remember. Maybe forgetting really is for the best. But before I let it fade again, I wanted to share it. To this day, I never learned the truth. Maybe I was just unlucky, or maybe I was part of something I was never supposed to see. All I know is, if the police hadn't shown up, I might not be here to tell this story. Some doors are better left unopened, and that back door is one of them. Most family traditions are warm, comforting, something you look forward to every year. But what if the place meant to bring you peace was already occupied? This is the story of the summer my family discovered we weren't alone in my father's beach house. This happened just last year. I'm 40 now, married, with 2 little boys, ages 7 and 5. I work in insurance, nothing exciting, but it keeps us stable, and that's all I really care about these days. A couple of years ago, my dad passed away after a long fight with cancer. He left behind a small beach house in Delaware. I'd never been there before, since he always rented it out year-round. It's nothing fancy, but it sits in a perfect spot just 1 block off the boardwalk. My favorite part is the upstairs deck, the one in the back. From there, you can see the ocean spread out like a painting. After Dad passed, we started using the place every summer, a week here, a weekend there. It became our little tradition. My wife and I love it, but the boys love it even more. They'll spend hours running the beach, riding bikes, exploring the town. It felt like a gift, something my father left behind for us to hold on to. And this story takes place during one of those weeks last summer. We went down in mid-July, staying from Sunday to Friday, the kind of trip where the crowds thin out by midweek and the beach feels quieter, almost private. I remember that Wednesday night vividly. The boys had passed out around 9:30 after spending the whole day in the sun, and my wife and I were on the back deck, playing cards and sipping wine under the warm night air. That's when our older son Jordan suddenly came outside. His face was pale, uneasy. He told me he couldn't sleep because there was a scratching noise in his room, something that wouldn't stop. I set my glass down, exchanged a quick glance with my wife, and stood up. I told her to stay put, I'd check it out. In my head, I brushed it off as the kind of creaks and groans an old beach house naturally makes. The boys sleep in separate rooms, so there was no reason to wake the younger one. I followed Jordan downstairs. He walked me into his room, then pointed silently toward the wall near his bed, and motioned for me to listen. We stood there in silence for a while. At first, I didn't hear anything, but I didn't want Jordan to think I doubted him, so I kept listening. After maybe 20 seconds, it came faint, but real. A soft scratching sound, just like he described. I crouched down and pressed my ear to the wall. It didn't sound like a raccoon in the rafters or a mouse in the attic. No, it was lower, closer to the baseboards. And then I froze. I heard it breathing. Not an animal. Not even close. The sound was slow, deep, unmistakably human. I jerked back, whispering, "Jesus," without even meaning to. And then, before I could process it, a sound erupted from inside the wall, a guttural, furious scream, so raw it shook me to my core. It wasn't the cry of an animal. It wasn't pain. It was rage. Pure, human rage. It hit me so hard I actually shouted, every nerve in my body firing with a wave of dread I'll never forget. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed Jordan by the arm and yanked him out of the room. We sprinted down the hall to my younger son, Scott, who was still fast asleep. I didn't even give him a chance to wake up. I scooped him into my arms and ran. The only thought pounding in my head was to get back upstairs, back to the deck where my wife was. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I shouted her name. That's when it came again, another scream. Louder. Closer. I spun around and saw him. A man, filthy, wild-eyed, his skin streaked with dirt and grime. He was charging straight down the hallway at us. I nearly stumbled trying to get up the stairs with both boys, but somehow we made it. We bolted through the sliding door onto the deck, and just as I slammed it shut, he hit the glass. Full force. The entire frame shook. For a moment, I was sure the glass would shatter. He clawed at the door like a rabid animal, shrieking, pounding, spitting out words so vile I can't even repeat them. I threw my body against the door, bracing it with everything I had, and screamed at my wife to grab the kids and call the police. She pulled them back, covering their ears, keeping them away from the sight of him. I kept my eyes locked on his, trying to block the view, trying to shield my family from the madness on the other side of the glass. He was wild, completely unhinged. His hands smeared something across the door, dirt, blood. I couldn't tell and dragged it down the glass with every slam. The sound of it made my skin crawl. I don't know how long I held that door shut. A minute, 5. It felt like forever. And the terrifying part? He never seemed to tire. His energy was endless. He just kept pounding, clawing, screaming like he would never stop. All I could think about was keeping my family safe. If the glass broke, I was ready to fight, to do whatever I had to. But before it came to that, flashing lights cut through the dark. The police, they must have come around the side, because within seconds I saw 2 officers rush inside the house. The man was still slamming his fists against the door when one officer tackled him from behind. Another joined in, wrestling him to the floor, finally restraining him. After that, everything blurred together. The screaming stopped, the house fell eerily quiet, and the man was dragged out into the night, shoved into the back of a police car. The officers asked me to explain what had happened, and I told them everything, every detail I could remember. Then, together, we walked through the house, searching for how that man had gotten inside the walls, how he'd appeared so suddenly. That's when they showed me something I had no idea existed. A crawl space, hidden beneath the back porch, with an entrance nearly impossible to notice unless you knew where to look. From there, it ran alongside the foundation and led directly to a second access point, a loose panel in Jordan's closet. I had no idea the crawl space even existed. When I inherited the place, I never did a full inspection. I barely even touched it, no renovations, no refinishing, just a place to escape. A few days later, a detective called to follow up. That's when I learned the truth. The man admitted he had been living in the crawl space for months. He had found the hidden entrance during the off-season and claimed the place as his new home. That night, he wasn't just lurking. He was planning to hurt us for daring to intrude on what he thought was his. Apparently, he'd been stealing food, sometimes from our kitchen, other times straight out of neighbors' trash bins. It was subtle enough we never noticed until the police told us. We never went back for the rest of the summer. Not because we thought it would happen again, but because the trauma was too raw. I couldn't bring my wife or kids back there, and they didn't argue. I eventually hired a crew to seal off the crawl space completely. Once that was done, I could finally breathe again. At least a little. This summer, we started using the house again, and things have been normal, or at least as close to normal as they'll ever get after something like that. The crawl space is sealed now, and life has gone back to normal at least, as close to normal as it ever can be. But sometimes, when the house creaks late at night, I can't help but wonder if sealing it off really made a difference. Or if someone, someday, will find another way back inside. Have you ever experienced something so strange that no matter how many times you replay it in your head, it still doesn't add up? This is the story of a summer night under the stars when 2 friends went stargazing, and somehow both of them swore the other vanished without a trace. There's something about growing up in the countryside that never leaves you. Endless empty roads, nights so dark they swallowed you whole, and that strange mix of peace and unease that only true silence can bring. For me, summer was everything. Warmth, quiet, emptiness, like I had my own hidden corner of the world. At 16, I loved it. But one July night, that silence turned into something else. Something I've never forgotten. I had a friend back then named Taylor, reckless, daring, the kind of girl who always pushed me into things I normally wouldn't do. That night, she had an idea. "Let's go stargazing," she said. It sounded harmless enough, but looking back now, I sometimes wonder if that night was less about stars and more about what was watching us from the dark. It was just the 2 of us, 2 bikes and a stolen bottle of wine. Nothing unusual. We'd done this countless times before, sneaking out, finding hidden places to stargaze, talking until we got tired enough to ride home. But what happened that night would make it one of the last times we ever did. We didn't have a real plan, just a direction. Taylor said she knew a spot past the edge of town, abandoned farmland, where no one would bother us. I remember how casual she sounded, like she'd been there before, but looking back, I don't think she had. By the time we left, it was around 10. We pedaled deeper and deeper into nothingness. Streetlights vanished behind us. Houses became memories, and the silence grew heavier with every push of the pedals. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30, I honestly lost track. Then, without warning, Taylor stopped her bike. "We're here," she whispered. But there was nothing, no barns, no fences, no landmarks at all, just an endless stretch of open field. And yet, it did feel perfect, too perfect. A sea of tall grass beneath us, and above, a sky full of stars so bright it almost felt unnatural. That should have been peaceful. But instead, something about it felt wrong. We spread out the blanket in the middle of that empty field, and Taylor popped the cork with the little opener she'd brought along like she'd been planning this night for longer than she admitted. The wine was cheap, bitter, and warm, but we kept drinking anyway, passing the bottle back and forth, laughing, pointing out constellations we barely remembered the names of. The goal on nights like this was always the same: catch a shooting star. Taylor asked if I thought we'd actually see one. I told her probably not, but to keep looking anyway. Out here in the countryside, with no lights around, the sky looked impossibly crowded with stars. Too crowded. The longer I stared, the stranger it felt. Like the stars weren't fixed in place. Like some of them were pulsing, watching. Taylor kept drinking, giggling under her breath, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the night had shifted. Time felt thin. Like the world around us was suspended, holding its breath, waiting for something. And then I noticed how quiet everything had gotten. No crickets, no wind, just silence. This part isn't exactly central to what happened later, but it's one of those little details that stuck with me. There was a moment so quick it almost felt out of place with the rhythm of the night. Taylor leaned back and looked at me in a way I couldn't quite place. For a split second, I wondered if she wanted something more than friendship. I'd always had that suspicion growing up, but it was never more than passing curiosity. That night, though, it felt heavier, like something unspoken was hanging in the air. I didn't say anything, of course. Where we grew up, you didn't talk about things like that, and maybe I was just tipsy, reading too much into her silence. Either way, the moment passed. She laughed at something dumb I'd said, and just as the sound of her laughter faded, we both looked up. A streak of light tore across the sky, a shooting star. If you've ever seen one, you know the instinctive reaction. Awe, wonder, that little rush in your chest. But in the back of my mind, even as I smiled, I couldn't shake the strange thought. Sometimes a streak of light means something is burning out, falling, dying. Like most people do when they see a shooting star, we couldn't help but laugh, shout, and giggle into the night. Taylor smirked and told me to make a wish. I don't even remember what I wished for, probably something silly, something meaningless. But at the time, it felt important. We kept talking for a few minutes. Lighter now, the moment almost magical. The air was warm, the stars endless. At one point, I closed my eyes not to sleep, just to feel the breeze against my face and soak in the silence of the countryside. I swear on my life, my eyes were closed for no more than 5 seconds. But when I opened them, Taylor was gone. Not just off to the side, not scrolling on her phone, not wandering into the field. Gone. Completely. Her bike wasn't there either, only mine, leaning casually against the blanket where we'd been lying. I shot upright, my heart pounding, spinning in a full circle to scan the field. Empty. Wide open and lifeless. The kind of emptiness that feels wrong. My first thought was that she was messing with me, hiding somewhere, trying to scare me. But as the seconds dragged on and the silence thickened, I knew this wasn't a joke. In that instant, a wave of fear I couldn't explain hit me like ice water. The wide open field, which only moments ago felt freeing, suddenly felt suffocating, like the earth itself was closing in around me. The stars above looked dimmer, as if someone had smeared ash across the sky. It was still the same night, the same place, but wrong. Off. The air grew colder too. Not naturally, but in a way that felt unnatural, like I had stepped into a different version of reality. My chest tightened, and every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. I pulled out my phone, desperate for some sense of control, and froze. 3:00 a.m. Exactly. That time is burned into my memory forever. Only minutes before, it had been just past midnight. There was no way hours had passed in the blink of an eye. I hadn't fallen asleep, I knew I hadn't, but staring at that screen, my mind fought itself, wondering if maybe I had blacked out for some reason. Even if I had, Taylor would never leave me like that. Not in a million years. I stood up, spinning in a full circle, calling her name again and again. My voice echoed across the emptiness of the field, but no answer came back. No footsteps. No bike tires. Nothing but the cold whisper of wind. The only thought I could cling to was that maybe she had gotten annoyed, maybe wandered off. But it didn't make sense. We hadn't fought. The night had been perfect, and yet she was gone. I must have called Taylor's phone a dozen times, but every ring went unanswered. That's when the panic finally broke me. I started crying. And honestly, can you blame me? My best friend was gone. The night sky felt wrong, and I had no explanation for any of it. I grabbed my bike and pedaled harder than I ever had in my life. That ride back home felt endless, like the road was stretching longer with every push of the pedals. Every sound in the darkness made me flinch. Every shadow felt like it was chasing me. By the time I reached my driveway, I was drenched in sweat, gasping for air, and still had no idea what had just happened. I went straight to bed, too shaken to think. Sleep came fast, but not easy. The next morning I texted Taylor, half expecting an apology, maybe even a laugh about ditching me. Instead, her reply froze me to my core. She demanded an explanation from me. Her exact words burned into my mind. "Where the hell did you go last night?" I told her what I remembered that I'd opened my eyes. She was gone, and I thought she'd left me. But then she said something that made my stomach drop. Taylor swore she was the one who woke up at 3:00 a.m. alone. She waited for me for over an hour before finally giving up and biking home, furious and confused. According to her, I was the one who disappeared, and I was just as convinced it had happened in reverse. We argued in circles, trying to piece it together, but nothing made sense. There were no memory gaps, no proof, no call logs to back up what either of us swore we remembered. It was like the night had rewritten itself around us, erasing the evidence. Eventually, we stopped talking about it, but the silence never meant peace. For months afterward, I would lie awake at night, staring at the stars outside my window, replaying every second of that summer night in my head. Taylor and I never went stargazing again, not the way we used to. Maybe once or twice, but the magic was gone, replaced with something darker. To this day, I still have no explanation. I've told the story a few times, and everyone says the same thing, something unnatural happened to us. And maybe they're right. I hate to admit it, but I feel it too. Deep down, Taylor and I drifted apart. I haven't heard from her in years, but I would bet my life that wherever she is, she still looks up at the stars sometimes and wonders what really happened to us that summer night in the field. Ending, to this day, there's no explanation, no proof, no evidence. Just two memories that contradict each other and a night that refuses to be forgotten. Maybe it was a lie. Maybe it was something paranormal. Or maybe it was something far worse that neither of them ever understood. So tell me, what do you think really happened that summer night in the field?